Here, as far as it goes, is my definitive summary of the Windsor framework. Now, the question really is this a serious document, a serious agreement, or is it simply a redrafting of the Northern Ireland Protocol with a few minor adjustments that are significant, but perhaps not in the end hugely demonstrative. So Europe still retains significantly more control over Northern Ireland than perhaps than it certainly retains over any other part of the UK. Well, the answer is of course, Europe still has a foot in Northern Ireland. The question is how much. Now, if we see all this through the prism of something rather naughty that Michel Barnier was caught saying. He was caught on tape saying it. He was caught on tape saying at the beginning, shortly after Brexit, that if the EU were to isolate Northern Ireland, they would put pressure on Great Britain. Well, that's certainly what has happened. And that's certainly one of the problems with Brexit, with the Brexit that we've got. This is the argument which led some of the more hardline Brexiteers to say that we should leave without an agreement and then negotiate after leaving. And some people would say that what little Rishi Sunak has achieved now has been achieved because France worries, or because Europe worries, that should the Northern Ireland Protocol be abandoned because of the legislation which Boris Johnson was putting through Parliament, which he's very eager continues, that would give the British government the opportunity to tear up the legislation about the Northern Ireland Agreement, to invoke Article 16. Well, I don't think it's as clear as that, and I think people are being extremely blinkered to the political reality. The political reality is that we have a Northern Ireland devolved assembly in Stormont, which simply isn't sitting. And that means that the people in Northern Ireland are not able to do things. That is unacceptable, completely unacceptable. Now, does that put us in a situation that maybe, it could be argued, Boris was in, to accept any sort of deal, but simply to accept a deal? That may also be true. So is this a betrayal of Brexit, or is it a great achievement? I think it's more likely to be seen in the long term as a great achievement, because it does two things. And this is the positives of the Windsor framework. The first thing it does is it tries very hard to carve out a future for Northern Ireland, which is independent of the EU and dependent on Britain, on mainland Britain. It carves out the rhetoric, it uses the rhetoric in favour of Britain, but it still allows access to the EU. This puts Northern Ireland in a position where it can trade comfortably with the EU and with Britain. In fact, that's always been the case in the Northern Ireland Protocol. And that's a positive as far as I can see. The negative is that the apparent balance of the Stormont Break is quite complex and would be exceptional rather than routine in its implementation. So therefore, future EU law may well impinge on Northern Ireland. That is the problem. And that may well be the sticking point for the DUP. If I were in the DUP, or if I were a DUP leader, I would nod this through, because I think it offers more than it rejects, and because I think we've got to a point where this is about as much as they're going to get. They've got a great deal from this. But if you look at the detail, if you look at the detail, for example, on VAT, although Britain can impose VAT in pubs on alcohol, it can't really impose VAT on alcohol in supermarkets, which would be defined by Europe. That's as far as I can understand it. So there is some ambiguity. But it seems a step in the right direction. Is it something that that one can change? Well, that's going to be much harder as well. It's going to be much harder to negotiate out of this because Rishi Sunak has confirmed that it will be part of international law. It will be embedded into the Vienna Convention. So future governments will find it very hard to pull away from this, should they want to. So, the deal of the Windsor framework. 3 key areas of trade. Nothing new here. The idea of the red and the green lane has been bandied around for some time. So, the idea of the green lane is that all red tape will be cancelled. The idea of the red lane is that it will remain. In terms of VAT, in terms of sausages, in terms of medicine, excise rules, and pet travel, Northern Ireland will have parity with the UK. That means Northern Ireland benefits from the same VAT as the UK, with some modification, with some minor exceptions. I think, as I say, alcohol in supermarkets will be an exception. And all food sold in the UK will also be sold in Northern Ireland. That will include Lincolnshire sausages. So, for example, the sausages that I knew when I was a child living in Spalding. These sort of gigantic, girthy sausages. Now, Northern Ireland will be allowed to question new European laws. This is the Stormont Break. And how will that work? Well, it will only work with exceptional laws, and it would require 30 members of the Assembly, 30 MLAs from 2 or more parties. That means 2 or more parties. It's not specifically from the DUP and Sinn Féin, for example. It could be from 2 unionist parties to sign a petition and to have public backing to explain what is wrong, and this will then automatically suspend the new EU rule, the new EU law, and will start a negotiation with the Parliament in Westminster. Now, is that really a reworking of the Northern Ireland Protocol, or is it something different? I think it is. I think it's very much in the detail and on the cusp of, as Steve Baker said, on the cusp. It's not a done deal yet, and it would be very good, I think, if it were a done deal. I think it's the right thing to do. And I think if the alcohol issue with VAT is possibly addressed or clarified, I think that needs to be clarified. Then I think I don't see any problem with it. I don't see any problem with it at all. But the ERG, and particularly Boris's friends, may see this as an opportunity to bring Rishi Sunak down. So at the moment, this is without doubt a moment for Rishi Sunak to crow that he has in fact put Boris in an almost impossible position where Boris cannot think about coming back. This is an amazing personal victory for Rishi Sunak. Because if it goes through, then Boris is done. Absolutely. If it fails to go through, because Boris has been whispering in the ear of the DUP and is known to have been whispering in the ear of the DUP, then Boris will be blamed for one of the biggest diplomatic crises in the last 20 years. And I don't think that will curry favour with anybody who wants to see Boris back in number 10. Either way, Boris is sunk. The only thing he can possibly do at the moment, if he hopes for any future, is to keep quiet. Already there are rumours that Boris has been advising the DUP to reject the deal. Then that may be fake news. He's possibly working on 2 drafts and wondering which one benefits him personally. My take is that neither do. The only thing he can possibly do, if he wants to think of anything beyond this moment, is to keep quiet, and I don't think that's in Boris's character. So the Northern Ireland executive needs to function, and the Northern Ireland executive is now forced to function if it wants the Stormont Break to work. I think that's a very clever piece of politics. The only thing which I think in this particular agreement which is likely to appeal to the DUP, particularly when they start looking at the detail, and the detail is that 2 unionist parties could band together and stop EU legislation coming into Northern Ireland. That's remarkable. It doesn't need to be across the political divide. It could just simply be 2 unionist parties. They could stop EU legislation coming into Northern Ireland, as long as there are 30 members to sign a petition. Now, the other reason why this is so spectacular is it only works if Stormont is sitting. So it drives the DUP back into Stormont. It drives the Assembly back into functioning, which is what it should be doing anyway. Rishi today talked about the access that people in Northern Ireland will have to businesses, both in businesses and products from the UK and the EU markets. Well, they've already had that. That's what the Northern Ireland Protocol already provided. Single market access, is that a good thing? Well, it slightly puts the dampers on the idea of a Brexit commitment. But yeah, dual access, it's tremendous. Privileged access, it's tremendous. And the EU and Lincolnshire sausages idea, this can be seen as a sort of metaphor for what is achieved. Rishi Sunak has achieved a sausage breakthrough in a Coca-Cola factory this morning, where he was being presented by Chris Heaton-Harris, and he was at his most animated. In fact, both of them were at their most animated and doing a sort of lap of honour, and with good reason. But I think probably what we will see as a result of this, as time goes by, we'll see a rise in labelling, with a lot of things saying UK product only for sale in the UK. And that may be, I suspect that will be across the entire country. I don't think that will be exclusive to Northern Ireland. And what will be exclusive to Northern Ireland is the Stormont Break. And I think one could live with that. Let me know what you think. I'd be very interested. I'm sorry it's gone on a little bit. I think to summarise, the major achievement is the Stormont Break and gagging Boris. Those are the 2 major achievements. Everything else is up for negotiation, and everything else is up for debate and examination. But it is an achievement, be in no doubt at all. The naysayers will say, well, it's not much of an achievement. I think it's a significant achievement, particularly in terms of gagging Boris.